great to have you on the call. It's fabulous to have you all here today. We're all working at home, so obviously hopefully it's a little bit more accessible for you all to participate in these webinars at the moment. We were dreaming of a nice glossy lunch in Fortnum and Mason, but it's not going to happen this time. We're going to be having a webinar, so maybe some of you got your lunch with you today, so please do snack away whilst we talk about empowering women. So I'm delighted to kick off our first webinar, our first event around empowering women. My passion for setting up these events was through Supermums. We're actively placing talent and mums within different companies within the Salesforce system, so both Salesforce customers, enterprise level, through down to small companies, as well as Salesforce partners. And it's that common question of like, well, they actively want to get more female CVs, which is absolutely great, but also we've had questions like, well, how do we support women in the workplace? What can we do more of? And I've likened to that myself. It's like, well, I want to support women, but actually what is the best practice approaches for doing that? What should we be thinking about? Like, I don't know everything, and I'm learning as much as you throughout this from a series of experts that work in the sector. So I set up these webinars to help us talk to different companies, find out what they're doing, share ideas and knowledge, but also bring together experts who work in these different areas, which I'll share more of, to really just share that learning, so we can all go away and actually think about, well, why is this important? What can we do? And then measure the impact of what we're doing. So the events aim to inspire, inform and ignite action amongst leaders. I'm particularly focusing in on the Salesforce sector. So to kickstart the webinar series, and it's all talking about shaping the agenda today, I'm absolutely delighted to have Christy and Sarah with us from Salesforce. Thanks so much for joining, both of you. Do you just want to introduce yourselves whilst you're here?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for having us. So my name is Christy. I lead the retail and travel, transport, and hospitality solution engineers at Salesforce. As you can imagine, both of those industries are having slightly different experiences right now. But in addition to that, I also led the Salesforce Women's Network for the past 3 years, and have recently stepped down with Sarah, my VP, taking over.
Hey all, I'm Sarah. I lead our data solution success team for EMEA. So we're in post-sales, driving success for customers. We're the non-paid for part of the services arm. I'm lucky enough to be taking over an amazing organization that Christy has built over the past few years. And as president of Women's Network for UK, really happy to be here today to share some of what we've been doing with you and to answer questions that you might have and to hopefully learn from some of you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for joining. That's great. And we've got Jen Wood as well as part of our Supermums team taking questions and fielding chat. So she's here.
Hello, I'm on mute.
Help.
Sorry. Hello, everybody.
Fantastic. So yes, so today's all learning about what Salesforce are doing, and particularly around the women's network. And I'll kick off really the agenda around why is this important, and it stems back to, I suppose, why I set up Supermums in the first place. There was sort of key areas that I felt that we needed to support more mums into the workplace, but also when I looked at the sort of the wider agenda, there's been quite sort of 5 key areas of I suppose problems where women are discriminated against in different ways or aren't being given the opportunities perhaps that they could, and there's proven research around all of these areas. And during the course of the webinar series, we will sort of be digging down into these each area in a bit more, and we can share some useful stats, because I appreciate if you're building a business case at work, then you'll probably want some of the stats behind it to show and tell. So the identified problems are there is an insufficient number of women in tech. The STEM agenda has been around a long time, and that starts in schools, but also we can encourage more women who are older, more mature, even in their 50s and 60s. We've just had a supermum join the course who's in her 60s, which is fabulous. It's never too late, right, to get into the tech sector. So we should be encouraging women to come to the tech sector all the way through, because there isn't enough at the moment. The other kind of key agenda areas around addressing the gender balance in career progression, because again, we're seeing women drop out as they progress up to senior level. So it's about supporting that, nurturing, providing mentoring and sponsorship to continue to support people so they can take senior level positions. So there's been some really interesting examples that I've seen around that, and certainly speaking to female directors at some of our sponsors like Deloitte and Accenture, it's really fantastic to see that actually directors even within corporate consultancies work part-time and are able to work from home as well, and they can balance everything. And that's really reassuring to me that it is absolutely possible, and that we should be supporting that within all levels of business. And then you've got the aspect around maintaining equality during the recruitment process. So, you know, you don't want to be ruling out women because they might be going on maternity leave. Absolutely not. You know, what you want to be thinking about is, okay, what assets have these individuals got holistically, and make sure that you're supporting an equality process. So you're making sure accessing CVs from different places. It's why, again, people have come to Supermums, because they want to make sure they've got enough female CVs as part of their recruitment process. But it's equally looking at, you know, well, when do we hire people and what skills do they have? And again, it's really refreshing to hear of companies that actually hire people whilst they're on maternity leave or whilst they're pregnant, because they're actually seeing the value of what those skills are. So it's not about discriminating about anybody. I think the important things is that you're taking active measures to support people into the right roles, and broadening your net where you can do, if you don't think it's currently reflecting an equal representation of the population. The next is around tackling the gender pay gap. So again, that's been an area that government has particularly supported and made more transparent for people. So companies like Salesforce have been very visible, stepping up to that plate, but it's really been a firm agenda for bigger companies who have to report on it. And then the final one is support for women returners and women that have been out of the workplace whilst having children, but also I think it's getting a wider agenda now. So I spoke to Salesforce the other week because they're really looking to create a returnship program, but not only for women, but also for other individuals that might not have been in the workplace for a while. And that's fantastic. And that's certainly getting more thought leadership at the moment, and companies sort of developing those mechanisms. And it's not just about upskilling them on technical skills, but it's also about providing more pastoral support around just, you know, being back in a new environment and rebuilding that confidence and the softer skills that you might need when you haven't been at home, you know, in the workplace for a while. So, you know, there's lots of problems that have been identified, and what we want to do is really encourage companies to think about what the benefits are, but also what actions they can take. And that's why this session is called Shaping the Agenda. So it's been, I think, you know, there has to be a reason. And I think it's really valuable to reflect on, you know, what the benefits are for companies to start with, in order to get your buy-in if you're listening today, but also anybody else who's thinking about what they should be doing here. So Salesforce, you know, they always are the inspiration, and I think they lead the Salesforce sector, be it from customers and partners, with that, you know, first foot forward approach. And so they've been ranked number 7th as the best workplace for women in one of the Forbes index. And there's a blog article which we can share with you. We'll share the slide deck, but they particularly pulled out around pay, parental leave, and having diverse meetings with equal balance of gender in those meetings, in a blog to back up why they were ranked 7th. So it's interesting to see, you know, there's lots of different activities you could take, but they really pulled out these 3 areas. And then Accenture, who's one of our sponsors of Supermums, equally, they did a big piece of research around this, and you'll find the research at accenture.com/getting-to-equal. And the research is fascinating, and I'm going to share some of it with you today. But off the back of that, Accenture put a target in place to achieve a 50-50 gender balance at all levels by 2025. So they're actively working towards that now, progressing really well, following a recent interview I did with Anna Bancroft, who's the managing director of their Salesforce practice. They're certainly making steps towards that. And as I say, I will share some of those findings, but it's a fantastic resource if you go to that website. So that's part of your homework today, is to go and have a read. And some of the benefits that, you know, are described on that Accenture website, but equally is out there in media, and we've got a range of articles we can share with you. There's key benefits for a business, as well as also for the individuals. One is about addressing the talent gap to grow, because our businesses won't grow if we don't address the talent gap. Like it's very obvious that the Salesforce ecosystem is quaking a little bit because there isn't enough talent to go round, and Salesforce has put a huge amount of effort into sort of attracting more people into it and making it more accessible through Trailhead, which wasn't around, you know, quite a few years ago. So it's absolutely something that is an agenda at the moment, and I think we all have a responsibility to support that. And again, I'm really thankful for the companies that have stepped forward to sponsor Supermums, because they're trying to address the talent shortage. You know, that's one of their key agendas. So we all need to do that, because it will all help our companies in the long run when we use Salesforce. The other kind of key stats that have come out, and Salesforce very much champion at events that they speak at, is gender balance improves overall performance of a business. And that's, you know, within those diverse meetings that they feel that their meetings are more successful. But overall, you know, that then transcends into a meeting is more successful. Well, that means you come out with more successful outcomes, and the business performs better. So again, it's really interesting to see those discussions and arguments around that. And then when I was speaking to St James's Wealth Management, who again is one of our sponsors, for them it was around, they felt that they needed to hire more women internally because they wanted to represent their customer base. They felt they were quite male dominated, but actually their customer base was much broader than that, and they wanted to hire staff who they felt could have better interest or alignment with their different customers, and they felt that that would make them more successful. And then other research, you know, thinking about the individuals for a moment, yes, we want a successful business, but equally, you want employees to be happier. Like, you want employees to be happy, and you want them to be productive. And it's proven that if they've got improved well-being and flexibility to manage their work and their life pressures, which, you know, granted is pretty much the biggest issue we've got right now with the COVID-19 agenda, you know, they will be happy and supportive. So it's really important for the employers to support that and get that balance right, because overall, if you can provide that, you'll be more successful. So how do you go about achieving these benefits? So if we think about the 4 key pillars of an agenda, you've got policies, which can range from anything from flexibility to childcare, maternity, parental leave, or pay. You know, it's not an exhaustive list, but there's a range of things where women need to be thought about in there. And equally, parental policies and talking about paternity leave is also coming onto the agenda quite a lot. So think about policies. The second is around processes. So that could be anything through, you know, thinking mindfully around what's our process for recruitment, for promotion of job opportunities, for pay assessments, or promotion of people within the workplace. You know, how do we support equality in those processes? And then you've got the range of activities that you could deliver, anything from different events, the training you provide, initiatives, etc., to boost confidence or leadership or awareness around these areas. And these events and activities might be both for the women in the workplace, but also maybe for the wider, you know, the men in the workplace. And Christy will share a little bit about how that works at Salesforce. And then you've got the analysis of impact. So how do you assess what women are wanting, but also what's the benefits of the support that you have provided, or your company has provided in the workplace? Because I think it's really important that, one, you tailor and you focus on activities that are meaningful for people who you employ, but equally, you know, once you've put those things into place, are they working the way that you expected them to? So off the back of these webinars, we'd love to, obviously, for you to all stay with us on this journey over the next year or so, and to report back on, you know, actually we implemented XYZ, and this has been the impact of what we've done. You know, that's what your success looks like. My background is in impact measurement, so I'm pretty anal about this. So I'd love to sort of hear, you know, where you've got to, and to create your own little theory of change. You know, what is it that you're doing? And to kick off that theory of change, and I love this because it gives me like a clear checkbox of things to think about, but also to ask your staff about what's important, is Accenture in their research, they identified 40 factors that influence advancement and characterize a culture of equality. So this is really, I'm not going to go through these in detail now because it would take a long time, but it's part of your homework to read through them and tick off things that you think are relevant to where you work right now, or indeed put together a list of things to share with your staff and ask them about what they feel is important and get them to vote on it. So then you come away with an agenda of your own that you can move forward with. So essentially categorize them into 3 groups. So I'll just talk about that widely, but the first is bold leadership. The second grouping is around comprehensive action. And then the third is about having an empowering environment. So there's a fantastic list of things that you can think about in regards to how you support women in the workplace. And this, as I say, is a really good starting point when you're going to be going through this. So I'll let you have a read through those areas in your own time, but we're going to hand over now to Christy, who's going to share with us how Salesforce operates in terms of supporting women, particularly looking at the women's network. And my questions that I put to her is like, what is the purpose of the women's network? Like, what does it do? And what is the value of that to both the business and the women there? And then as we go through the session, please do, jot down your Q&As, and both Sarah and Christy will, be happy to answer any questions that you have. I suppose my ideal scenario is that some of you might think about, well, we'll go do this at our workplace. Like, we'll nick some of their ideas and go, that's the point of these webinars today. So don't be shy, grill them for information, mind them, and hopefully you'll take away some ideas today. So I'll hand over to you, Christy.
Thank you so much, Heather. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. I believe, Heather, that you need to stop sharing in order for me to share. We're all learning Zoom.
Thank you.
At the moment. Okay, excellent. Great. Okay. Has everyone got a slide deck with mine and Sarah's face on it? Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you. So we're using some visual aids today just for the purpose of keeping this exciting because of the remote format. But really, I'm just going to talk through a bit of what the Salesforce Women's Network is, why we think that women's networks or ERGs in general are important, and then how we structure ourselves. And as Heather said, the point here is for you to find inspiration in this. So think about how this might apply in your workplace. Think about if you do have a women's network or gender equality-based ERGs. How are they structured now? Is there anything that you could take from this? And then please do ask us specific questions, right? Again, because we're on a webinar, it's really easy for us to be able to talk about your specific experiences. So feel free. Just why gender equality, right? And yeah, it's obvious. I think some of us may be a little bit tired of answering why gender equality, and also some of us may think, it's so obvious now that no one's going to ask. But of all of the things that I've read recently, this particular statistic I think hits the hardest. And when we talk about the gender pay gap, what we're really saying is that the way that a woman is paid early in her career and the pay gaps that might have existed at some point in a woman's career can compound so much over time that they become really, especially at the end of her career, quite crippling. We look at figures that showcase the difference in the pension pots of men and women who ended their careers in similar places and who have been in the workplace for the same amount of time. And again, this particular quote from the BBC, a woman can expect to earn almost $250,000 less than the average man over the course of her career. So even when we're looking at very small pay gaps or what's perceived as small pay gaps within an industry or even a specific company, that can really compound and make a massive, massive difference. So even though we talk about, gender equality is really at the forefront nowadays, we hear a lot about it. That's a good thing, right? There is no finish line to this equality. And yes, we do also want to make sure that we're putting our focus on other types of diversity rather than just gender equality. But just because we've talked a lot about it doesn't mean that we're done. So why women's networks matter, and I think this again applies to all ERGs, all employee resource groups, but just talking specifically about our women's network. One of the things that we do is we really promote equal representation. And as I was saying, the gender pay gap is something that, yes, we do talk about a lot, and we're very vocal about the way that we do our annual analysis around equal pay. But the Women's Network is also there to continue to amplify that message and make sure that it remains top of mind. The other thing is educating. So, you know, we talk about the causes and the challenges that women face in the workplace and outside. We talk about wanting to educate our allies. And when we say that, typically we're referring to men about the experience of a woman. But actually, there's educating ourselves too, right? So, you know, I was chatting earlier with Sarah and Heather about this example of a colleague of mine who was telling me, you know, I have endometriosis, and that's a real challenge in the workplace. And although I had heard of endometriosis, I have no idea what those challenges might be, right? And when she walked me through, you know, how difficult it is for her and all the things that come up, I really began to empathize with that experience. And so, you know, we ourselves can be allies. Educating others isn't just about educating men, it's about educating ourselves to different challenges that other women might experience. Creating a stronger voice and calling out behaviors. So I saw this within Heather's 40 factors. This is a really, really big thing, right? So ensuring that your population, your employees, all understand what is bad behavior and feel supported enough and comfortable enough to be able to call that out, or at least tell someone about what they'd seen. That really goes into creating a safe culture. And finally, changing the narrative. So making sure that, again, you know, there is no end to equality. We continue striving for it every day. That is a necessary and not a nice to have. You know, we do talk about the business value of equality very frequently. And again, you know, looking at the Accenture analysis there's so much viable information, but making sure that people understand that it's not just you could get better if the narrative is this is what we need to do, right? So the Salesforce Women's Network is the first and largest of the employee resource groups at Salesforce. We currently have 10,000 plus global members across 42 offices. Here in the UK, we have around 500 members. And that might not seem like a lot, given the size of our company globally, but that actually represents about 25% of our UK workforce. So it's a very, very big number. We've got a great level of engagement, and we're really proud of that. We're also really proud that Salesforce Women's Network has logged 15,000 plus volunteer hours across the world last year. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail as I talk about how we break down and manage our leadership committee. I'm actually going to stop there really quickly before I jump into that. Are there any questions on what we do? Just pulling up the faces again. Jennifer, we don't have any questions in the chat or anything, do we?
No, not at the moment, but if anybody
Okay,
has any, please share them.
Perfect. No, I'll go ahead. So what I'm going to move on now to is how we structure ourselves. And the background to this really is that ERGs are meant to do good, right? And there are always a lot of ideas that go around. we really wanted to structure ourselves for accountability and for action when we talk about the leadership team that manages that ERG. When I first joined the Salesforce Women's Network, before I started leading it, I found that the leadership team had a lot of ideas, had a lot of thoughts, but it was very difficult to get from thought to execution. So what we did is we structured our leadership team, our committee, into different pillars or work streams, as we call them internally. And these actually align really well to what Heather was showing earlier around policy, process, activities, and analysis. So events, of course, I don't think I need to explain that for anyone. I think any of you who have a women's network or similar, they create events. They create moments for your members to connect with each other and with you, and to learn. We also have a philanthropy arm. And so when I mentioned that we logged 15,000 plus hours globally, this is through our philanthropy arm. So what we do there is we have a team of people in the UK who are responsible for deciding what are the organizations and the causes that really align to our values, and how do we drive our members and our employees to volunteer with them? How do we create experiences where they're able to give back to those causes? There's also a really nice learning angle to that too. And then policy and behaviors. So this actually is potentially a little bit different from what some of you might have in your ERGs. We actually have a team in our leadership committee that align directly with our employee success and our talent development. So that's our HR and talent development functions. And this team has two purposes, right? It kind of acts as a conduit between our HR talent development and our employee base. So on the one hand, we are the voice of the employees, and we survey and ask, the employees, we take the pulse of what they're thinking, and we feed that back. So when we talk about challenges with promoting women into senior leadership positions, we know what our audience is saying, and we can make sure that the people making the policies and making the decisions are never far from that. Heather also mentioned, a returners program. This team of policy and behaviors was also part of crafting our existing parental leave and returners policy. And then the other half of that is making sure that our population knows about all of the great things that our policymakers are doing. And again, an example there, we implemented some really exciting changes to our fertility benefits a couple of years ago, where egg freezing, for example, support to freeze your eggs was introduced, amongst a bunch of other things. And we realized that a lot of our members weren't aware that that benefit had been put into place. So we helped then the people, making that policy, arranging those benefits, as a platform for them to reach the audience, because we know that we have such a captive audience that 25% of the population are really actively listening to what we're sharing. And then finally here, communications, right? So we have a team who's dedicated to making sure that all of the communications that we share are clear, that they align to our vision and our values, and also that we're not overwhelming our audience, because there's a lot that goes on and there are a lot of things that we do. So really making sure that that message is clear and concise is a huge part of making sure that our audience remains engaged and wants to hear what we're saying. And the final pillar here is what we call allyship. Allyship is not actually a word, I came to find out a year ago, but we use it a lot internally at Salesforce. Just to speak about the action of being an ally, right? Actively being an ally. And when we created our leadership team model, it was very deliberate that we included a chief ally in that leadership team. That chief ally is a man And although we have other men on the committee and our executive sponsors, it was very deliberate that we have a chief ally in the room to make sure that he represented the male voice. I know that a lot of women's networks can become echo chambers, and it was extremely important for us that we have someone in the room who was able to sense check what we were thinking and make sure that it actually reflected the way that we were being perceived. But also, again, like we're the conduit to our policymakers, this person is the conduit to our male allies, our male peers within the company. So making sure that he could properly message our objectives and our vision.
Oh, you're still there, aren't you?
I am, yeah.
I wasn't.
I
It's not
couldn't
my
hear you
end.
for a second. I could see your mouth moving. Have we lost Christy? Okay, cool. Well, if she dials back in, I can pick up. So I think, she was talking about the fact that, if you're not cognizant about bringing in that point of view, that you can get a bit of an echo chamber within the women's network. And so having that male voice and having that thread around allyship is really important. One of the ways we do this as well is that we have in the past had several men involved with the committee. Our executive sponsor is a man as well. But as much as anything, having somebody who's really laser focused on how do we communicate with our allies? How do we bring our allies together? One of the really powerful things parents run in the last year is to bring men together into focus groups to ask them about what they think about allyship and how they respond with that. So I'm actually just gonna, if it's okay.
Sorry, can you not hear me?
We lost you, Christy.
Oh.
So I was just picking up around the allyship point. I was actually just about to move to the ally journey slide, but if you want to pick up and
Sure.
present.
Sorry, I didn't realize you lost me. Yeah. So I think Heather is sharing her screen. So
I'll stop again. There you go.
Okay, great. Perfect. Sorry, everyone.
Are you busy chatting to yourself?
I was very much chatting to myself for a long time. So I guess this is where we left off. Yeah. Did everybody see this slide before I apparently got kicked out? No. Nope. Okay, great.
I was just about to go there.
Thanks, Sarah. Goodness, I don't know why Zoom kicked me out. We learn new things every day. So we very deliberately included a chief ally role in the committee to make sure that we weren't in an echo chamber, to make sure that we had the point of view of our male population reflected in the room, but also that he was able to be an effective conduit towards the men in the company to make sure that they were understanding the message that we were putting out there. And so this really just is expanding on that. And like I said at the beginning with the example about endometriosis, it's not just men who are allies to women in this cause of gender equality, it's women who are allies to other women in experiences that they might not be familiar with. So being an ally is really critical to our culture at Salesforce. And the way that we frame being an ally is all about asking, listening, showing up, and speaking up. And we call these the sort of stages of being an ally. This is something that each and every one of you can bring back to your companies and make sure that your male population and your female population understand how to be great allies to others in the company at all levels of diversity. But this has been really essential for us to, in the Women's Network, just making sure that we understand how to message to our male and female allies, how to engage with the causes and the different information that's disseminated through the Women's Network. So that is, in a nutshell, why we think women's networks are really one of the best ways to move the needle for gender equality. And that's how we've organized ourselves at Salesforce in order to make sure that we're achieving that.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
That's fantastic. Brilliant.
Thank you.
So we're going to put out some, anybody can ask the question in the chat. We'll leave it on, or you've handed it back to me. That's fantastic. Let's yeah, go for it if you've got any questions. Whilst you're thinking about your questions, I've got a couple that I'll ask of you. So the first is, how do you assess your impact as the women's network, both on, I suppose, the women, but also the business itself? You know, have you got any examples that you could share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the best examples that we know, how do we know we're being successful? We're at the point where HR is coming to us for help. So as new policies get introduced or as new programs come up, they are asking for our views, they're asking to engage with us. And I think that really demonstrates the power that we do have as a network internally. We're peers, we're not HR. So there are conversations that we can potentially have that people might be uncomfortable having with HR. A great example of this is that we know that we have a specific challenge around women in high-level individual contributor and junior management roles in the business. And we know that it's not a promotion issue when you look at the numbers. So the question becomes around retention. What are the reasons why you would leave? What are the reasons why you would stay? And starting to really understand that both on a quantitative but also on a qualitative basis. So we've been running a work stream through our policy subcommittee to look at that with HR, to engage with them, to help conduct the interviews, to help workshop that, and to make sure that there's a forum where employees feel comfortable having those conversations. And it's not hey, we're sitting having a conversation with HR, which can be quite daunting, but we're having a conversation with our peers, and that information is going back to HR to be used in ways to design programs that help us to retain high value employees. There's obviously business benefit to that. Recruiting in at that level can be a lengthy process. And, obviously there's the optics of failure to retain at those types of levels as well, because obviously that's your leadership pipeline development out the window if you don't have it. So, from a few different angles, absolutely valuable. And that's just, one of the threads that we've seen in the past few months.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a safe space. It makes absolute sense, doesn't it, to feedback. Brilliant. Okay, we have a next question from Nitsun. Hi, Nitsun. So is this network internal to Salesforce?
Yes, that's the short answer. With the business, there's very specific guidance that, it is, they want the ERG to be focused on employees. We do on occasion run events that we are able to invite in some of our partners, some of our customers. We would like to do more of that. We're looking how to do more of that this year and partnering with people from women's networks across multiple tech companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon. In its early days, there's also questions around, how does this work in relation to something like a bigger, broader women in tech piece? There's a lot of questions to be answered, but broadly, yep, employee resource groups tend to focus on employees. There's no reason to say they can't have customer and partner elements as well.
Yeah, something that we've been thinking about for a long time is the value of networking with other employees. And although, as Sarah mentions, it's a challenge, because an employee resource group is funded internally for employees, but it's something that's always top of mind, because we understand that the more we can get our employees to broaden their own networks and interact with people outside the company, the more valuable it is for their careers overall.
And for the business, actually, being able to bring in outside perspective, industry perspective from peers is incredibly valuable. Learning best practices. And I think there's ways in which we do that within women's network type of environments that are a bit different. to what you'd get at a more general networking event.
Fantastic. And Nixon asked, was the initiative top down or bottom up? Like, where did it stem from? And I suppose it'd be good to add on to that a bit about how do you run with it now? Like, who shapes the agenda in your own sort of network?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So maybe I'll take the historical view, and Sarah, you can take the future, since that's what it is. I'm the past and you're the present. So historically, it was bottom up, right? And it's a blend of both, actually, in reality. So the Salesforce Women's Network was started by an employee as a group, right? Before we officially sort of called it an employee resource group and it had any real meaning at a global level. It was started by an employee who wanted to create this network, and then it scaled. And in the UK, it was started by an employee named Marie Hannigan. So that was an organic, right? The concept of the Women's Network existed at a global level, but an individual here had to start it and say, we're doing this here. And we also had the flexibility of creating what we wanted. So when I talk about the different pillars and the way that we structure ourselves, it's entirely up to us to decide how we structure that leadership team and the things that we do. So in that sense, it's bottom up, it's ground up. A few years ago, we brought in Tony Profit. I don't know if everyone on the call is familiar with him. He's our Chief Equality Officer. And part of bringing him in was this desire to really maximize the output and the effectiveness of our employee resource groups, because we were getting really, we had a big desire to maximize our diversity goals and to really make a lot of change internally. And the company saw these ground up employee resource groups as one of the best ways of doing that. So ever since the Office of Equality, which is Tony Profit's, our Chief Equality Officer's sort of realm, since that was founded, we actually now have a constant sort of bottom up and top down approach, because we have process and efficiencies coming from the top, and we have insight and ideas coming from the bottom, and execution coming from the bottom. Sarah, do you want to talk a bit about the future of that? Because I think it's still evolving.
Yeah, I definitely can. I also just wanted to give a little perspective as well. You know, when we talk about the top-down piece, we also receive funding from the global organization. And so, you know, just to give you an idea about that, and these are industry benchmarks, so I'm not sharing anything I shouldn't, but industry benchmark is that the middle about 50% of global ERGs receive under 5,000 US dollars. The middle quarter receive about 10,000, and about 20% receive about 20,000 or more in the US. So just to give you a view of the kind of levels of funding that you see across the industry, it depends on how much the business chooses to invest. But part of the reason for bringing Tony in was because as Salesforce was making an investment in the employee resource groups, they wanted to make sure that there was good practice, good governance around all that. And that was, again, why it was around the effectiveness of output as well. So as we're spending the money, how many employees are we actually able to impact with this? What's the level of impact that the committees around the world are each able to maintain? So just for a little bit of perspective and hopefully some useful data for you. Yeah, so the future and where we're going with it, you know, it's become a much bigger group. Even when I joined a few years ago, when Christy had started leading the group, we had fewer than 10 people on the committee. We're now up to almost double that today, almost 20. And so it's really amazing because there's so much that a larger group is able to do. There are so many more initiatives that we can take on. But, you know, in that we have to make sure we coordinate. We have to really think about how we amplify each other. There's a heck of a lot of coordination that's needed around just making sure that comms don't become completely overwhelming, which Christy alluded to earlier. Our major threads. So our engagement with HR has definitely been there for the past few years. It's something we're looking to amplify further as well. I actually just took in an inquiry today from a specific business unit that is looking to understand more about why they've seen falling numbers of women within the business unit. And so they've asked to engage with us. Again, that came from HR saying, hey, you should go talk to the Women's Network to understand what some of your challenges might be and to talk about what good practice might look like. So that's one thread. Another thread, Christy talked about this as well, looking to work more with external groups and making sure that we're really developing deep networks across the industry. That's a major element for us this year, and thinking and looking at how we do that. And then the final piece is really around the philanthropy and volunteering element. You know, that's such a strong part of our DNA, both as a business and as an employee resource group. So Salesforce Women's Network UK has been investing volunteer time in a school locally. We have a slew of initiatives across the year, and that's something that we see as not only an opportunity to give back, but also an opportunity to bring people together around those types of activities. So those are kind of the major things that we're looking at the moment. As we develop further, there's, you know, a lot that we'll want to talk about around women in leadership. And that's going to be part of the conversation moving forward. Does that answer your question, Nitsan?
She's got another one though, which is a good one. So I'll package that. Love your questions. You can come again. So it dovetails with a question I had as well around, you know, practical steps. If you were setting up a women's network in your company, what do you think are the key ingredients to kind of, you know, what resource do you need? You know, Nathan was like, I'm going to set this up in my company. Like, what, you know, what should she pull together? And Nitsan said about, can you speak more about how easy or hard it was to get allies on board? So that kind of dovetails with that, I think, quite nicely. What would you say?
Do you want to start with the early days?
Yeah, sure. So getting it started, the first thing that I would say you need is some form of sponsorship. And that's both financial and I guess emotional, right? So you need to, I would say, and this follows on from your top-down sort of bottom-up question. Whatever you're doing with this, you need to make sure that you have at least one person in a senior place who will echo the sentiment of what you're doing and who will get behind it fully. If they can add money to that, that's great, because what money does is it lets you create events and things that really get your audience excited. And the more excited you can get your audience, the more they'll stick with you. But the very most important thing is having someone in a senior position who is willing to speak on your behalf and amplify your message so that everyone understands that what you're doing is important for the company. Yeah.
Another piece in that, if I can interrupt.
Yeah.
One of the things I very much value in our executive sponsor, Leon, is that he's deeply involved with the business. He has a lot of history with the business. He understands the priorities, and he understands the priorities that our leaders have. And having that insight, you know, when I started with Women's Network, I was an individual contributor. I didn't have much exposure outside of my business unit, and having that perspective really helps, because it means that as you're thinking about what you're doing, when you're speaking to senior leaders, you can talk about how what you do aligns with the goals that they have for the organization. There's obviously within Salesforce a large conversation around equality. This is absolutely explicitly part of leaders' metrics. And so being able to speak about, here's what we're doing to support you in that effort is incredibly valuable. Challenges that the business might be having, there may be conversations that your company is having around returnership, being able to bring a perspective in there and to bring in a credible perspective as well is, I think, really important. Part of the reason why we also run the survey activities that we do early in the year is to kind of understand where the employee's mindset is and what is important to them. And that's a view that doesn't often come to HR and doesn't often come to senior leadership in an unfiltered way. So being able to say, hey, this is what your people are talking about. This is what they care about. Don't worry about this initiative that you're doing because it's going to fall on deaf ears. I think that's actually really important. And that's something that ERGs provide that leaders do not get in another way.
Yeah, I think just also on, you know, what are the things that you need? Sarah touched on a really great thing there. And I would say one of the first steps should be having a lot of conversations with as many women in the business as you can, right? Just set up coffee chats, virtual coffee chats, obviously, at the moment. Don't leave the house to do that, please. I did not mention a house leave. But I think whatever you do, if you are going to create a women's network, it needs to be focusing on the things that the majority of people want to talk about. You know, it's all about the network. So making sure that you're having as many conversations as possible with women around the business and men, to really understand what they actually want out of this, so that you can deliver something that they would want is essential, right? That's probably number 2 on the list.
Awesome. And that means that you're going to support that impact first, you know, because if you're wondering about your impact, at least then if you're tackling things that people have asked for, you're halfway there, right? You know,
Precisely.
you go through. So we had another question around how do you address that the network is diverse in itself? So that, you know, you mentioned you've got 25% representation from the UK staff. But how do you know, who do you know who they all are, and is it representative of the women?
That's a great question. So one of the challenges that is, I don't think, unique in Salesforce, where we have employee resource groups, we have resource groups for Black employees, for employees of South Asian and Southeast Asian origin, for employees who identify as gay, lesbian, trans, etc. So there are many opportunities for people to find groups that they identify with. And often the first place that somebody identifies is not with being a woman. So what we've ended up with, and what we're really working quite hard to make sure that we counterweight, is the fact that by and large, the Women's Network Committee has historically been mostly white. And we do have an overrepresentation of North Americans on the committee, which is something that Christy and I have discussed many times. But it is one of those things that I think it's important not just to think about the people who are sort of in the inner circle, so in our case on the committee, but also to think about people who are, Christy used this amazing term, creators around the business. So making sure that they feel welcome, that they feel that they have a space that we can amplify things that they're doing as well. So one, we have very consciously tried to make sure that we are encouraging women who are women of color, women who identify as lesbian or other, etc. We've tried to make sure that that is part of the conversation that we've had. Something that we did in one of the teams I was a part of at Salesforce is ask the question, what is this person bringing to the committee that we don't have already? And asking that question has really enabled us to get a really diverse group. So for one of the roles that we were recruiting for in this latest recruitment cycle, we had somebody who was incredibly experienced. And at the same time, we also had a recent graduate who'd come through our graduate recruitment scheme, also had some great experience. The person who was more experienced would probably have done a fantastic job, but we didn't have somebody who had the younger perspective, and we didn't have that younger perspective represented within the Women's Network. So we brought in our graduate who is doing a phenomenal job. And it's really about thinking about that as well, which can be a little challenging sometimes, especially when you're talking about something like age, because obviously somebody who's older is going to have had more experiences. But it's in making sure that you're thinking about what somebody is bringing that's different and what that is going to add to the conversation. So I think that's a really powerful tool. And then, you know, as I said, making sure that there are people outside of that inner circle who you can draw on, who you can bring into the conversation, who you can work with on specific initiatives, so that it really broadens it outside of that just individual group.
Yeah, so really good interesting points there. And I think, having written recent articles or doing my change management course with some of our Supermum trainees, it's about that, you know, a team needs a diverse skill sets. When you look at the Belbin model and Myers-Briggs and everything like that as well, you know, that's the diversity, isn't it?
Yep.
You don't want shy women,
Neurodiversity.
you know, feeling like they can't participate, or introverts and extroverts, and then the different skill sets to set up all these activities and policies and everything. There's quite a lot, you know. I don't want to put people off doing this. What we want to do is encourage, like, you know, this is your starting point, but I think it's interesting, like the learning you've shared is like, you know, everybody might want to get involved, but I think it's selective and going, well, actually, what do I need? You know, what skill set do I need to make this work? Because what you don't want is a load of people who share the same common traits or skills or, you know, maybe geographies or whatever it is. It's that diversity, isn't it?
I would say that's true. I think based on our experience and the experience of some of the other ERGs in Salesforce, usually early on, it's not about everybody wanting to get involved. That's what you get as a benefit of having had some early successes. Yeah. So, I mean, early on, if somebody wants to get involved, I would absolutely say have them involved. Speaking very transparently, we have had people who were involved in the committee who, you know, had been involved early and had a lot to contribute, and then maybe their involvement had dropped off. So one of the things we had to go through last year was in really having some conversations with folks and being really honest about, hey, what do you want your contribution to be this year? So that's something as well, is really making sure that there's an open dialogue around what is the contribution that you can make now. And a couple of our members coming into this financial year, you know, really said to us, and, you know, I appreciate the honesty, is I don't have bandwidth to be involved with this anymore. I want to be involved in the future, but right now isn't the right time. And so I think that's really important, because it gives you the opportunity to bring in new voices, to bring in fresh voices, and to make sure that everybody who's in the room is contributing. So I would say that's something that I would build in early from a cultural perspective, is making sure it's okay to say, hey, this is way too much, or hey, I'm going through a really tough time. I need help with this. So that, you know, everybody can be really open about that.
Yeah. And that's really part of the accountability model, right? It's, you're here to do something, you're here to create output. And if you know that you're here to create output, then you feel comfortable raising your hand and saying that output's not going to happen. Whereas when you have a group and it's not clearly defined that you need to create something, it's easy to just drop off and disappear because you're not accountable for anything.
Yeah. No, they're really good points. Thank you. That's brilliant. So of the audience listening, how many of you, can you write in the chat whether you have a women's group already or whether you're interested in creating one? It'd just be really interesting to see where you're all at. You just want to put that in the chat to us, that'd be fab. We need a step-by-step guide to setting up a women's night. I can feel that coming on.
Step one.
If anyone could do it, Sarah could do it. Her
The learnings from
documentation skills are incredible.
That's awesome. So we had a
Oh,
start.
Charlotte's experience sounds really interesting. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, me too.
Lost its way.
Yeah, sounds like it's quite a theme here.
Yeah, some of those points, I think that's why it'd be nice to put something together off the back of this, like summarize the points, like if you were to put together what are the things you need, because I think, you know, having that executive sponsorship, having the right people on board, you know, having an agenda, I mean,
but why?
Yeah,
have a reason for doing it as something that you want to do. I think I'd be really interested to hear from Charlotte or Ron or Eleanor on this to understand, you know, a little bit of what happens. But I think that's very much something I could see happening, because people get really excited at the start of stuff and everybody wants to get involved, and then it's about how do you keep it going? How do you getting tangled in my cable? How do you keep it going? How do you make sure, you know, as Christy alluded to, things are happening, that it's action oriented? And I think that's really key, is if it starts that way and it goes that way, then it will continue that way. But otherwise it's very easy to get excited and then it kind of over time.
Yeah. And also when you think about action and outcome orientation with this, you know, Heather spoke to analysis. And I think one of the things that you've got to be really careful of is that you're not setting yourself really hard targets for creating change, because a lot of the change that this type of an initiative will bring upon is actually more about the influence of that change. It's quite hard to directly associate a lot of the outcomes that you're looking for to this activity alone. So what I mean by that is if one of the objectives of your ERG, of your women's network, is to increase retention of female employees, right? As an example, how might you set yourself a target that relates to that, that is actually something you can measure as your women's network specifically having contributed to, right? Because the retention of female employees has a lot of factors, not just your group. So what goals can you set yourself that relate to things that you can actually measure for your group alone as a unique contributor, as opposed to, you know, increasing the retention overall? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Kind
no,
of.
absolutely. And I think,
Maybe.
you know, for me, it's kind of like holding on, like those 40 points shared with Essentia kind of, give you a framework of a thought process to think around. Because I think, you know, before, I suppose those 40 points for me were like, oh, right, okay, I've got something to work from, you know, whereas when you say, well, it's a women's network, you know, you kind of like, you know, it feels like a big mountain, right? You know, where do I start? What do we focus on? Like, what can we do? You know, where? So, you know, it's having that sort of short list of things to go, okay, well, let's look through the list, let's put that out to the group, let's find out what people are interested in, and sort of start carving out a bit of an agenda around it, really, and a strategy, isn't it? So I think it's been really interesting to kind of, you know, hear where people are at, but also, you know, share the stories. That it's not always straightforward, is it? It's kind of you know, it's finding your way and navigating. Even at Salesforce, you kind of always imagine that, you know, everything, like they look like they do everything so well, which I'm sure they do, but you know, you're all on that learning journey, and you're still on that learning journey, right? And I think that's why it's so good to share that with people along the way. Fantastic. So putting it back to the group, I'll move on to my next slide. I suppose the questions to the audience, really, and please do put these in the chat if you have the answers now. We will be sending out a little survey afterwards as well, because we want to shape the agenda for these events to help you shape the agenda for women in your workplaces. So, you know, the first is, you know, what can we share? Is there other initiatives that you're already running in your workplace that you'd like to share with others on these webinars? And chat about with others? So we'd love to hear from them. And I think, again, if they're not perfect, that's not the point. You know, it's more about what are you doing, what's working well and what's not working well, and then we can sort of share expertise. You know, what would you like to know more about? So knowledge. So, you know, hopefully all of those of you who've had a women's network or want to relive it, hopefully you've got some points today, but, you know, feel free to still ask some questions if you've got some. So how can we share knowledge amongst everybody, and what is it that you'd like to know more about, because then we can get those experts in place. And, you know, what actions can you take off the back of today? I'd love to see if there's been any light bulb moments. If you can put in the chat something that you'd like to do off the back of today, I'd love to see it. And I'm sure Christy and Sarah would love that feedback too. You know, what's it sparked for you? Is it something you can do around, you know, shaping the agenda overall, or is there something around policies or processes or different activities you might run, or any analysis you might run? If you can just put in the chat now, you know, what thing you'd like to take away from today and start to do or look at, that would be fantastic. But we will ask you again in a survey, just so we've got it collated and you can reflect on the session today as well. And if any of you need any support, we have some in-house experts at Supermums that can come in and support strategy development for women in the workplace. Some of our associates that we work with, so they can support on strategy, they can help deliver coaching and mentoring for women in the workplace, or various activities. Equally, we are supporting companies to hire more female talent through our recruitment service, or provide training in sort of some of the technical areas as well, like Marketing Cloud and Platform One and consultancy skills. So if there's any way that Supermums can support you further than beyond these webinars, then let us know. And in terms of upcoming webinars, we've got, sorry, just jump forward then, we've got 2 more webinars. One might, well, we're still hoping that the one on the 7th might be a lunch, but every time we watch the news, it feels a little bit more distant at the moment. But
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed,
We
yeah.
want a fancy lunch.
Yeah. On the 12th of May, we've got Antoinette giving a webinar on giving women a powerful voice. Which came up obviously as something really important in the session today, both from what Essentia said and what Christy kindly shared. So, you know, women need to feel strong and confident to be vocal in the workplace. So we'll be sharing some strategies around that. And then we've got Lisa, who is an expert in HR and flexibility, and is one of our associates that we work with around supporting companies to set up women-friendly workplaces, or those that support flexibility, which at the moment we're all very flexible, right? So I'm not sure we need it anymore, but you know, setting up policies and practices for the long term to make sure it all fits in. So that's on the 7th of July. So we have got registration open for those now. I believe some of you have signed up for some of those, which is fantastic. So yeah, if you've got any other questions or would like to share what you've done today, then they say please put it in chat if there's been anything specifically of interest. We will be compiling the information from today, and Jen will be putting it together in a blog, won't you, for me? So
yes, I've been scribbling away.
Yeah, so we will be putting that together, and I think it's great to think about, you know, what a women's network is, and to share that learning. And also we'll provide a link to the 40, where you'll find the 40 factors that Essentia shared, and we'll be posting that on and sharing it with social. So if you liked what you heard, you know, please do share it with everybody. I suppose my vision is to create ripples within the ecosystem, and feel like we're touching, you know, a range of companies and say customers and partners who actively are doing more to support women in their workplace. And we share the best practice at Salesforce to sort of, you know, set the example, and we can start to replicate that out. And we've got other staff from Salesforce equally wanting to speak on upcoming webinars too, which is great. So there's more that you guys do than just the Women's Network that we'll be sharing. Is there any final points from Sarah or Chrissy that you'd like to share at the moment before we finish up?
No, just again, a thank you to you really for setting this up. I was so honored when you reached out and wanted us to speak, and it's been really lovely to speak to everyone today. I know you're all on, you know, in different stages in your journeys with your ERGs, but you know, for those who've tried before, don't give up. It's definitely worthwhile.
Yep. Final thought for me is this is such a wonderful opportunity that we have at the moment to really think about how we work and what we do and how we do it. So I just say, you know, spread the word. If we can all work like this now, why can't we work like this normally? There's so much I think that people in general can get out of doing this. And this is not just because I've loved working from home, I promise. But I think there's such great learnings that we have around things like how to run virtual workshops and all of that. So I think, you know, if we can take this time as a really special time and think about the impact it can have beyond these few, I'll say optimistically, weeks, I think there's a lot that we can use this time for as well.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you both. We're getting lots of nice thank yous from everybody who's been listening in. So thank you. As I say, reflect on everything today. We'd love to hear back from you via the survey, and just keep shaping our agenda, because at the end of the day, our agenda is your agenda. We want to help you too. So we want to be shaped by what you need equally. I'll practice walk the talk. We want to be the network of networks, right? Of people where we can disseminate the knowledge, the learning, and then sprinkle it all down through the different networks and companies throughout. So hopefully we'll have a good story to tell at the Partner Summit next year, because we haven't got a summit this year. But so we'd like to hear your stories and what you've been up to since we've left. So thank you again, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and I'm glad you all enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.